Hey folks, welcome to the podcast. This is a podcast about Catholic things. And I'm Eric Engel, the ambassador of common sense. This is Dan Engel,
the ambassador of nonsense.
So last week we talked about hauntings, ghosts, and the possible Catholic explanations for it. By the way, you probably noticed the new music that we have. Mostly for these two recordings, we try to add a little bit of spookiness because of upcoming Halloween, and our brother Jason actually donated the music, so thanks to him. This week we're going to talk about the allowable Catholic interaction with these things, how we're allowed to study it, research it, look for it, or at least whether or not we're allowed to. But before we really get into that, I think maybe we should talk a little bit about the difference between interacting with the dead or contacting the dead, which is clearly talked about in the Bible, as opposed to, say, praying to saints and or even, say, talking to your dead mother in a moment of almost prayer-like talk, and how those differ from each other. Dan, why don't you take that one?
I think the key there, and maybe you have some other insight with a better explanation, but the idea is that the stuff that we're not allowed to do involves usually either forcing the dead to do something. Conjuring is usually forcing a spirit to appear, creating some kind of physical interaction, or trying to get knowledge from them. Very common thing is knowledge about the future or something like that. So it's almost trying to receive communication from them in a way that's personal and even goes beyond just the question of, say, signs or something like that. So, but on the other hand, this idea of simply praying to a person, the kind of nice thing about it is that when, you pray to a saint, okay, well, the person, you're praying to a presumption of a saint. So you're directing your prayer to this idea of this person who is now with God in heaven because they've lived a life that has, that was in Christ, and so that now your communication to them allows that to be amplified through them, because they can now also pray to God on your behalf. They're right there with God. And so there's this intentionality to it. Let's suppose that the person you're praying to, let's say it's one of these people, before they become a saint, but people believe they were holy, and so they start praying for them, for miracles, for their cause or something. Let's suppose the person isn't in heaven. Let's suppose that they had a secret, bad life and actually are in hell or something like that. Well, it's not like your prayer is then going to that person and giving that person any kind of power over you because they're in hell instead of in heaven, and by praying to them you're opening yourself up or anything like that. And that's the distinction. When you simply pray, you're not opening yourself to anything. And furthermore, because it's an intentionality, okay, the prayer might not be efficacious because the person really isn't in heaven, and so the miracle you're praying for probably isn't going to happen in that case. But your prayer would only go to that presumed saint. It's only going to go to the person if the person really is who you're intending to pray to. It's kind of like a think of it as a postal system where your letter's only going to get to the right person, whatever that is.
Okay, so talking to your grandmother in sort of a prayerful way, expecting that communication to be passed on to God, or talking to the saints with the expectation that they are relaying these messages to God, is not talking to the dead. It is, however, wrong to try to contact the dead, as in communicate, or to use, and it's all through the Old Testament. I will set my face against anyone who turns to mediums and spiritists to prostitute themselves by following them, and I will cut them off from their people. That's in Leviticus. There's another one in Leviticus, and there's one in Deuteronomy. Really not much in the New Testament. And I would point out that the difference here between the Old and New Testaments is that in the Old Testament, if someone's talking to the dead and getting feedback, they are actually definitely talking to a demon, unless they're talking to God. But they're not talking to dead relatives, because dead relatives were not they were not in a position where they could communicate. Nonetheless, the church teaches very definitely that you are not allowed to talk to the dead. You are not allowed to use mediums to contact the dead or the spirit world. You are not allowed to summons. You're not allowed to use witchcraft. It's all forbidden, and very clearly. But, then we ask the question about things like ghost hunting and things of that nature. The problem is almost every show that I've ever seen, they are trying to communicate with the dead. They walk around with microphones and they say, "Is there anyone here?" That's communicating with the dead. If it's not communicating with the dead, then it's communicating with demons, which is just as bad.
On the other hand, what about a place where let's just make it a personal thing, not like a public reputation, but you have a buddy. He thinks his house is haunted. He's seen some strange stuff, and it disturbs him. He'd like to be able to know whether there's something supernatural going on or not, and so you, acting not as a sensationalist, this isn't a Hollywood type, but you just acting personally, go and set up some stuff, maybe cameras, to try to catch water faucets in the act of turning on, or other stuff like that, super sensitive recording equipment, high-speed camera, whatever, to try to get an indication whether there is something supernatural or whether there's natural explanations. What about that?
I think you're fine with that, but as long as it's just recording what's there and not trying to evoke anything.
You certainly never want to invite a spirit to become physically associated with you, whether that's by appearing or speaking or whatever.
And that's one of the biggest dangers there. Because okay, let's say that it happens to be a squirrel that's making all that racket, and you catch the squirrel on video. Wow, okay, we just saw that there's no ghost. But I especially, and it seems like again, when you watch those ghost hunter shows, they are very tedious and boring, and they do the same things in every show, it seems like. And but again, it's not just that they are trying to capture something, they are inviting something. And I think that's pretty dangerous. when you consider the fact that we went through what these things could be, if it's a demon, or if it's a soul in hell.
Yeah, are you opening yourself up to possession or something?
So you don't do that. But what about...
Right. Well, hold on. What about watching the people who do that anyway? Is that kind of like watching porn or something?
You know, I can't see that as being a sin.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that it's like, I don't understand why people do it. It's so boring.
Yeah.
It's so stupid.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So moving on.
When you hear the story, look, you're at a campfire or you're sitting at the bar or whatever, and this, the question comes up, or somebody tells a story about a haunting. Everybody's got their own story. Because it's not like you're inviting these things. It's just this happened to me when I was a kid, and we talk about it.
You draw your own conclusions. Right. It's kind of like a cultural tradition to swap ghost stories.
And many times they are true, and it's it leaves you with all kinds of questions. And there's nothing wrong with pondering these things, and maybe even doing a little bit more research. Well, where was this? If you guys hear background noise, I have waited till too late in the day because we kept having technical problems, and now there are people in the house that I cannot shut out completely. But it's looking more into it to find out if maybe there's a history or maybe getting more than one version of the story. I think there's no sin in that, but again, you gotta proceed with caution. And
right.
There's really no reason for us to have interaction with the supernatural other than praying. And your prayers are always directed toward God, possibly through other people, which is another discussion, but it is directed to God. And with a ghost, you're not doing that. And you can't do it. But, there is another thing, and especially this is true with the demonic. There's someone who, say, starts reading about this, maybe reads a book about exorcisms. I think there's, aside from, you're not going to sin, you're not going to talk to anyone, you're not going to invite anyone, but I think there is a danger of becoming obsessed with the subject.
Oh, right. If there's too much interest, if you allow it to occupy your mind.
Yeah, and I think, well, we both know people who have done this, and it just seemed like it's unhealthy anyway, to say the least, and it's not really a good place to be in, to obsess over the demonic and, this happened and that happened. Was that the devil's influence, or was that just a natural occurrence? And it gets to be where you see anything that's not immediately explainable as the work of the devil. I guess there's no direct sin there, but it's not a good place to be.
No, and in fact, the additional danger, not just where you start to see it everywhere, but there's a very fine line between being in that state and becoming someone who wants to see it, who wants to encounter it, who wants to see the, ongoingly wants to see the evidence, and then you are getting to that place where you're opening yourself up.
Well, then we got things like,
what about horror fiction?
I don't. I don't see a real problem with that. I never saw the draw of it.
Yeah, I don't either. That's one of my that's one of my favorite genres.
See,
myself,
my wife
so.
loves. Well, she doesn't read as much anymore, but she did, and she loves the horror movies, even though those B flicks, which I never got.
I like the cheap ones where you can almost see the camera. It's like you're not as much watching. There's the story, but what you're really watching is a film crew.
And I don't get it, but I guess there's nothing wrong with that. I don't quite understand the interest, but my wife loves them. Apparently, you love them. Here's the thing. I like reading a good Stephen King book, and as a writer, I have tried and tried to write horror stories. Every single one of them turns into a sci-fi story somewhere along the way.
Oh.
I can't seem to write about something that I don't believe is possible.
You always have to have an explanation that fits within your understanding of the world as a Catholic. I find myself the same way. It's like, I will watch, stories or read books or whatever, and it's like once they cross that line, there's less satisfaction. In fact, sometimes it's almost better if an author is a little bit less explanation giving,
which is one of Stephen King's specialties. Because some of the ideas for when you look at the plots of his books, something like Christine, there's no explanation for it. But when you think about it, when you say it, it's about a haunted car. It's so stupid sounding. But when you read the book, he's got a way of doing it. It makes it believable. You believe it as you're reading it.
Right,
but,
right. And he immerses you. He doesn't write the book about the car. Right. He writes the book about the people. He immerses you in their story and puts you in, okay, so there's this haunted car. This creates a struggle for somebody, and here's that struggle, and that's what the story's about.
Yeah, definitely. He's good at that, and I had tried to copy that, and I just can't do it. So what happened is I thought, there's books about different cities and hauntings in those cities. So I said, well, what about Cincinnati? There are books about haunted places in Cincinnati, but they're all about the same places. There's Bobby Mackey's, there's a music hall, there are documentaries out there on these things.
Right.
But I found that you usually hear the scariest stories when, again, it's more of a campfire situation. And it's the stuff nobody knows about that really is the scariest. So
yeah, because it's happening in homes.
Right. That's what I went after. And I ended up finding, really, it's just one person's life. And 4 stories that happened in there that seem to be supernatural. And it's a pretty good, it's very interesting.
I will look forward to it.
But I couldn't write it unless I believed it to be true, and that led me back to the supernatural and whether or not we're allowed to believe that stuff and how much we are allowed to immerse ourselves in that. And so that is our Halloween special. And I don't know, is there anything we didn't answer here?
No, I think we covered it pretty much. It's one of those things that it's out there. Like we said, it's kind of a cultural tradition to swap ghost stories, and we're certainly allowed to ponder these things to a degree. But we are not allowed to try to invite communication from the dead, and we're on very dangerous ground if we obsess about it too much, and especially where specifically demonic things are concerned.
Oh, you know what? Because we were there was a story that I wanted to tell last week, but I thought this borders on our interaction with it, so I'm going to say that.
Okay.
And this is not in the book. This is just something that I experienced, and I just thought it's something that you might influence how you see these simple hauntings, where it's just like loud noises at nights and stuff like that. When our sister Ginger, she moved into this place. She was young and single, and then shortly after that, I moved in with her. I was also young and single, so we had this house that was kind of a party house. I mean, it wasn't like sloppy party house, but a lot of people were often there, and we were often drinking. And but anyway, it seemed like maybe twice a month there would be these occurrences that we couldn't explain. Generally we weren't allowed to party upstairs because Ginger kept a pretty clean household. So we'd be in the basement and we'd be sitting around, and all of a sudden it was very apparent somebody was upstairs, not trying to hide their presence from us because they were walking around nice and loud, things like that. I think one time we heard a very large crash that I can't think of anything else that it sounded like, but it sounded like a giant tray of silverware dropping. And I mean, you heard the clattering, like and it was just, there's nothing else that could be. Silverware makes a pretty specific noise.
It's distinct, yeah.
Yeah.
And this was a crash, not a thud.
Yeah.
It was, okay,
and you could hear the continuation of that crash as the silverware kind of skidded across the floor and stuff like that. But we go upstairs, and nothing's disturbed. Nobody's there. This stuff happened pretty often. And I guess it wasn't... we talked about malevolence before and mischievous, and I wouldn't even describe it as mischievous. It's just they happened, and we could not find an explanation for it, and so we just kind of move on. But
but every couple months, huh?
Well, twice a month.
Or was it more like twice a month? Okay, every couple
weeks. It was pretty
often,
and it was witnessed by a lot of people.
Oh, okay.
And I guess after about a half a year, we decided to have Father Connerman was here at St. Martin's Parish, and we wanted him to come and bless the house. He showed up. He did his just simple blessing, talked to him for about 10 minutes. We didn't mention any of this other stuff. We just had him bless the house. Never once had another thing happen there.
Huh, no kidding.
And that makes me think these simple things that we would say is a, quote, good ghost.
That doesn't necessarily mean they're good.
It was gone after the house was blessed.
Yeah.
And this wasn't an exorcism or anything. It was just a simple blessing. But it just kind of makes you think, and makes, to me, that raises an awareness that it's not, just because it doesn't hurt someone doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah.
If a blessing makes it go away, that's telling to me.
Let me ask you this. Did the occurrences cause you to decide to have the house blessed, or was that something that you were eventually going to do anyway?
It's one of those things that, Mom had talked about, because, you move into a house, you have to have it blessed.
That's one of the things you do, yeah.
But it was those things that made us decide. Because we started talking about it more and more, and it just kept happening more and more frequently. And it got to, we thought it'd be a good idea to get it blessed for that reason. And it did stop after that. So I guess that does open up the idea, well, were we causing it somehow? Or was someone playing jokes?
Where I was going was, let's assume for a minute supernatural, an explanation, is that, let's assume a good ghost theory of some kind. Heck, let's think guardian angels. Okay, an explanation could be that there were evil spirits from whatever happened that somehow allowed them to obsess about that space and could eventually gradually cause spiritual harm to you and Ginger, the people living there. By the way, did you say your name before? I didn't know if you wanted to keep your name off the... Oh, okay. So anyway, so let's suppose that there may have been some evil spirits that were gradually working on some kind of spiritual harm, and your guardian angel was simply trying to alert you to the presence of spirits so that you would have the house blessed. That's a good ghost explanation. Again, you don't want to invite that ever. But it's out there as a possibility, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Current events.
I haven't even.
It's more.
I haven't even looked up Twitter lately, but yeah, it's
still Cavanaugh.
Yep, and
I believe today is Saturday, and I think by like 5 o'clock they're supposed to have made a decision.
Oh, they're actually voting today?
But I don't know. On Friday they did one vote, but the real vote cannot take place until after a certain time today. So
hold on a minute. I just popped open Twitter while we were talking, and this thing came up from Instapundit. It's just funny. Breaking news. Dianne Feinstein about to come forward with the names of 7 witnesses who say Cavanaugh murdered them.
I don't know. He might. It looks like he's going to be the next Supreme Court justice, which puts us one step closer to ending abortion in America. But we've thought that before.
Yeah. We got surprised by Kennedy, right?
Yeah. He kind of screwed us.
Yeah. And then he just got weirder and weirder.
I'll tell you what, these senators are getting some really, really bad death threats.
Oh, really?
Concerning this
the conservative senators?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the liberal ones who are not acting liberal right now. Who are voting for Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really kind of sick. I mean, they're protesting and showing up at their houses, and
wow.
I would have to say it's demonic.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole issue of abortion is it's just I don't know what else you could say about it. I think Rush Limbaugh once said it, and I've always thought this since he said it, is that abortion is the sacrifice of the left.
Yeah, that's a human sacrifice, to Satan, and the behavior of those who are in favor of abortion, their extremism with regards to anything that might, and it's not just that they want to be available, it's that they want it to be frequent. I mean, these especially in the last year, these movements of encouraging women to get and tell about their abortions and celebrate it, and
it's
I think demonic is the only thing that explains it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I don't know. look, if you look at something like prohibition, the government took away Americans' ability to make and serve alcohol. There was a lot of fighting over that, but
Yeah.
it wasn't even though it's something more Americans do and more Americans care about because it's part of their daily lives.
Yeah.
There was less fight over that than killing a baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a scary thing, and it's kind of interesting that, I mean, this right here in our lifetime is it's a historic time, and it's interesting. So
Yeah.
I guess we'll see what happens. In our last week's recording, did I talk about the fact that I believe abortion is eventually going to end in America?
Yes.
And that the rest of the world is going to follow suit.
Follow America's example. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I won't say anything now. Okay. The other thing is about this Pope Francis.
So
the
what do you do now?
accusations are just they're getting weirder and weirder, and at the same time, I'm not having a real difficult time believing them.
Oh, okay.
And,
right.
I mean, and I say conspiracy theories, but they're not the conspiracy theories that we heard as kids, like the black helicopters and the Mel Gibson film. They're conspiracy theories that seem to be rooted in things that we all know happened, and he's not denying any of it.
Right.
It's getting kind of scary there. It's weird because we grew up being told you have to pray for peace, you have to pray for America, you have to pray for the church.
Right.
And for a long time in America, things seemed kind of hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we're never going to get a handle on this abortion thing. We're never going to reverse the decline of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And within the past couple years, suddenly it seems to be, I don't know, any right-thinking Christian American would be hopeful right now.
Yeah.
At the things that are happening. Mostly because of Trump.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, and the church,
how do you not despair?
but at the same time, you were so close to despair when it came to America.
That's right.
And it's nothing short of miraculous the way things have gone in the past 2 years.
Right.
I mean, but no politician could have ever done this. Mm-hmm. So you think no pope can clean this up, what's going on right now. But I would say keep praying for it.
Well, yeah, and keep this in mind too. This is where we can take comfort. God has never made any specific promise regarding the United States. We're not protected. I mean, we can incur protection through prayer, hopefully, but we don't have any guarantee of protection by the Holy Spirit. The church does. So we know something's going to happen. Something's going to, whether gradually or suddenly, clear it up. We know the church is going to recover, but boy, it would be nice if it hurried up.
We're going to have a podcast on it sooner or later, but I think that we've been without the Eucharist for a long time. And it wasn't until 2011 when English-speaking America gained access to the Eucharist again.
Yeah, I know you've floated that before. Well, we'll have to have a discussion on it.
Yeah. Okay, but for now, I guess we're going to wrap up here and think about what we said and give us your comments on a podcast about CatholicThings.com. I'm Eric.
I'm Dan.
And we'll see you next week.
Yep.
Thanks.
Bye.